Well, we're here with Sarah Brasiel from the Institute of Education Sciences. How you doing, Sarah? Thanks for being here.
Great.
I wonder if you could introduce yourself to start and the work you do.
Yes, I'm Sarah Brasiel. I'm a program officer and education research analyst at the National Center for Special Education Research at the Institute of Education Sciences, and we're the independent research arm of the U.S. Department of Education. And I'm a middle-aged white woman with dirty blonde hair starting to turn gray, wearing a blue suit, and my pronouns are she, her.
Great, thank you. Well, just to get started, could you tell me what IES is up to in the field of data science education and what you're seeing and where things are going?
Yes, at the National Center for Special Education Research, we provide field-initiated research grants. And so our researchers are responding to local contexts and their needs. And so as you know, we have some instability in the teacher workforce. We have real needs in the area of teacher and student mental health. There's also chronic absenteeism, learning loss from the pandemic, and a real need for foundational reading skills. And so a lot of the research we get tends to be in subjects that are frequently tested, like math and science and reading. But there's a real need in science education. I was at a meeting, federal meeting on STEM education, and they said that many elementary students are only getting 20 minutes of science a week. And that's just not enough for students with disabilities to learn science, and not enough for teachers to actually learn and apply accessible learning strategies. And so it's great that states are starting to adopt data science standards, artificial intelligence standards, but we're really waiting to see, what is their implementation plan going to be? What kind of supports are they going to provide for teachers and resources, especially in the area of accessibility? And also very important is what kind of assessments are they going to be using? Will they be measuring student learning? Because a lot of research right now in this space is like seeing if students are interested in data science, are they engaged? But we really are interested in if they're learning. And that's the kind of research that we fund.
As we move forward with this and the work that IES is doing, that you're doing, what do you think are the enabling conditions for the progress that you'd like to see?
Yes, there's definitely three enabling conditions I think that need to happen. First, we need accessible materials and curriculum. We also need support for teachers, and we need assessments, as I mentioned. But there are some resources that I think people need to be aware of. For example, making information accessible especially needs to focus on students with sensory impairment, like blindness and deafness. And we have the National Technical Institute for the Deaf, who's doing great work on supporting students who are deaf in engineering and robotics activities. That is a great resource. Also, the American Printing House has created Code Jumper, which is a hands-on programming language for students who are blind or visually impaired. And the Office of Special Education Programs, they have a new Rhonda Weiss Accessible IDEA Data Center. And that's taking IDEA, which is a federal law, and the data that's collected every year, and figuring out new ways to make it accessible for the staff at state education agencies and local districts who are visually impaired. Different kinds of dynamic visualizations and data tables. And I think that's going to really transform how we look at data for all people. And I think that'll eventually inform K-12 data science education. And also now there's advances in artificial intelligence through work that the National Science Foundation is funding, that I think one day we're going to have sign language interpreters in every classroom, AI-informed ones. So I think there's a lot of really cool things going on that'll support accessibility. But also, I think we need to be thinking broader than just sensory impairment and just all students, all learners. And so there's universal design for learning, which should be applied to any kind of data science education curriculum development, where you start with the end user in mind, definitely students with disabilities, and think about text-to-speech. That can help kids with reading disabilities, different kinds of calculators and tools that now we have in technology to support learning, and also peers to support collaboration and provide students with feedback. Also, artificial intelligence, I think, is really starting to show the ability to customize learning for students, because there's this tension right now where we want to include students with disabilities in the general education classroom, but we also know they do need specialization to meet their needs. And teachers are overwhelmed. They do not have time to customize learning for every single student. And so I think there's a lot of power in artificial intelligence that we're waiting to see. We just funded an artificial intelligence institute with the National Science Foundation, and it's focusing on supporting speech and language pathologists. And it's starting with a screener because they usually use paper-based screeners, but it's going to have an artificial intelligence-based screener that'll determine the student's needs. And then there's an AI orchestrator that's actually going to determine the intervention or the activities that the students will need. And that'll be so much time saving for speech and language pathologists. And there's a shortage nationwide for that kind of person. So we really think that AI has a lot to offer.
I'm hearing really practical plans for the future. What gives you the optimism to build these plans?
I heard something really powerful last year at our Ed Games Expo, our special education technology showcase by Molly Levitt from remarkable.org. And she said, when you're building products for people with disabilities, this is not charity because disabled people have $175 billion in discretionary spending. And so I think what we have is a communications problem. If we really start communicating the number of people in this world, in this nation with disabilities, and also how if you create things that are accessible, it helps all people. And so I think when we start doing that, we're going to be centering the voice of people with disabilities more in these discussions. Also, I think, again, universal design for learning should be happening all the time in developing products. And we should be pushing it with our wallets, with our spending decisions, but the state and district levels, not buying products unless they are being made accessible, I think is really important. And we at the National Center for Special Education Research are really trying to broaden participation of people with disabilities in our grant programs. And we really want people on the research team with disabilities. We also want people collecting data who have disabilities. And we want to involve the families of the students because they know the emergent needs in special education. And so we really are trying to change our expectation for researchers.
That's wonderful. Part of the Educating All Learners Alliance's primary work is to create what we call a pathway to possible for educators and organizations across the country. What are some examples of the things that IES and the National Center for Special Education Research are doing to advance this vision? You've gone over some of them for students with disabilities to thrive in the data future.
Pathways are really important. And we have a data science internship actually at our National Center for Special Education Research. I've been a mentor of these interns for 3 years. And it's exciting. This year, we actually have students with disabilities who are data science interns. I have one who's an undergraduate and one who's a PhD student. And they have the opportunity to speak at conferences, to interview people in like the Office of Special Education Programs, Office of Civil Rights, to really understand this field. And then they also have a chance to look at our data and make recommendations of where the needs are in research. And I'm also just learning from them and their post-secondary experience. Like, what are the challenges? How are they getting support? And how are they successful? And so we definitely need more pathways like this. Also, through our research grant program, we would fund research to support transition of students to careers in data science as well as post-secondary. And so people should be encouraged to reach out to me if they're interested in designing a grant to support students in these kind of pathways. That is something that we would fund. Also, we really need venture capitalists and accelerators and foundations to come alongside of researchers because we develop these tools for students and they're great. They have effects. And then they get to publish a paper, and then they sit on a shelf. Our researchers are not necessarily expert in commercialization or scalability. Right. There are some institutions that have commercialization departments, but not all do. And so I think, to sort of amplify the dollars of the federal government, there's just lots of different opportunities for these pathways, and then to support also just getting these tools that have been shown to be effective out there to the students.
Yeah, and I would imagine, especially with what you were saying about just how big if you want to think about it this way, the market of folks with disabilities is, there really is an opportunity for folks with dollars to get involved and to amplify the work, but also to, if they want, amplify the return there.
And we also just need to empower students to be a part of the change. I was at a recent meeting where they were talking about the gaming industry, and I did not know that it has surpassed like streaming and television dollars. Like so many people are gaming. But the neat thing is that people with sensory disabilities are actually creating these adaptations to the games, and they're sharing them. And then when the game developers see that a lot of people are using these adaptations, they make it part of the game, like the next patch or the next update. And I think that's the kind of thing we need, learners with disabilities being a part of the change and becoming our future entrepreneurs and our future designers and in the workforce. And, the neurodiversity movement is just an example of that, where it's really helping people with disabilities highlight their strengths, both in workforce and in education, and where we're seeing the value of having people with disabilities in every conversation.
You're describing a lot of really practical steps that we can be taking now, or at least in the short term. where do you think this is going? What's a vision of you have for the future that you're hoping to bring about through this work?
I think it's really important to see that this can't happen unless the ecosystem of education changes to be more accessible. And that really starts with leadership. And so we have a lot of people posting on LinkedIn and Twitter about this certain state now has adopted data science education standards. That's great. But we really need to make sure that they're understanding like the web content accessibility guidelines and then, trained in that. So they're procuring and purchasing products and training that is accessible. And there's a lot of resources the Office of Special Education Programs has put out around accessibility. Also, the Office of Education Technology, like the new National Technology Education Plan, and that has guidance on accessibility. And so it's really important. The leaders, they're going to want to be the ones who have the resources. They need to be putting the money behind it as well, not just the standards, but we need the money for the resources. We need the money for the teacher training and the ongoing support that's going to be needed to make this happen. Otherwise, as we've seen from other initiatives in the past, it just doesn't happen. And so it's definitely a systems approach.
Yeah. What would you recommend for someone listening to this and these are maybe some new ideas for them and they want to become more proactive in inclusive education, accessible education, in data science or otherwise? What are some first steps that folks can take?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's different places where different people can have input. If you're a researcher, definitely we need research on developing measures. And so if you're not really sure about data science education, but you're interested in just like STEM education, take a leap and learn more about it. There are different guides now coming out from the federal government on computational literacy and convergence education that can be leveraged to design data science education. If you're a parent, I know there's different groups out there. I'm sure Innovate EDU has information too for parents, also data science for everyone. There's different groups now that are going to be, I think, being good at communicating to a wide, diverse groups of stakeholders. And so I think that is a need, though, is how do we get parents more educated as well?
You've given a lot of very practical tips and frameworks for moving forward. If you had to pick one thing, we'll say maybe two things, but if you had to pick, what is something that you hope people take away from this conversation to chew on and really work on moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just this whole ecosystem of accessible education, and that's going to involve everyone from leaders to families to teachers, just putting our dollars, where our mouth is. If we really value this, then we need to make sure we're only purchasing things that are accessible.
Sure.
And if you're developing something, then it needs to follow accessibility guidelines and include people with disabilities all throughout the whole way.
Yeah, just maintaining the, you mentioned earlier just the kind of under-discussed buying power that people with disabilities have. I would imagine that what comes with that is an underutilized perspective, having a seat at the table and contributing to the conversation.
And again, it's not only communication problem in terms of the resources they have, but also just the giftings and the talents they have. I think
Sure.
we've operated under a deficit mindset of what it means to have a disability. And I think,
Sure.
again, learning from the neurodiversity movement about the strengths and the value that can come from including people with disabilities.
Well, that's wonderful. I've really appreciated our conversation, Sarah.
Yeah,
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, I appreciate it.